6 points for an essay. One is directly on the thesis, the other one's about organization, which is your thesis. And so they really put a lot, that's almost a third of the score. Now, it doesn't mean if you don't write a good essay, they won't give you a good score, but the point is, a thesis statement is incredibly important to write a good essay. Working good. So I'll talk more about that tomorrow. I'll give you examples about it. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, we'll do examples in class. But the big thing about an essay is, if you organize, write a good thesis statement, the essay kind of writes itself. And don't forget, the body paragraphs are a short idea first on our test and the quiz. And in a paragraph, why it's important is how it proves or reinforces your thesis statement. That's the only difference. At a topic sentence, you basically got it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about writing an essay tomorrow, show you a little bit about outlining it. I'm a firm believer in organization. And I try to give you kind of a formula that you can use to write it because it's a timed essay. You don't have time to sit there and kind of reinvent it all. You have a limited amount of time to write. On the AP exam, normally you have 2 full essays to write. Last year, because of COVID and everything kind of fell apart, they only had 1 essay total. Before, you have 2 essays, some short IDs, and 55 multiple choice. 6 minutes. 4 hours. I will give you the questions tomorrow, too. You're going to choose from some questions. So you can come in organized and ready to write. Well, you guys will be coming in online on Teams. Remember how we did it for the test and it was B day had to come in? You guys will have to do that on A day, on Friday. I'll set it up on Teams, you come in, and it's just the way we're going to do it. And it'll be a little bit shorter because we only have 42 minutes or whatever it is, but I will set it up so you have a good, well-planned essay for that first one. Yes?
So it's just going to be 1 essay?
Mm-hmm. 1 essay. I'll give you, right now I have 2 questions. I might give you one more that you choose one of those 3.
And we're going to get the questions that are really...
My plan is to give it to you tomorrow.
Okay.
So I'll get it up, I'll post it up there. But you'll have it in advance. So you have enough time to go through it and look through it. So when we start it, you can just write. I want the first one, I want everyone to feel good about it, write a good essay. But essay, if we get a good thesis statement, there'll be a couple things I need, it's just the way it is. But you can do short IDs, you're going to write a good essay. Okay, so we'll get to the creepy clown in just a second. By the way, the AP exam. The AP exam is November 6th, you have to pay for it. No, the test is not November 6th. You have to pay by, and I had a little communication issue with the counselor in charge. Somehow, all her emails were going to my spam. I kind of feel bad. I have no idea. I must have done something. But I posted up here. It should be on all 3 periods. And I'll post it up. I'll do it again like 3 or 4 days from now. But November 6th, you have to pay online. It's $100. You can read the rest. Make sure you join that AP session. We did that like the first couple days in class. I don't use it for anything in class. I know some other teachers do, and that's great. But you have to be on there to take the exam. But I'll leave that up there. You can't pay online or go to the bookkeeper. $100, you know. Yes, you got to pass it, but it works for almost every college in the country. And at UM or MSU, you know, it's 10 credits. UM is 8. And they have different credit scale. Carroll at 6. AP US History, they really give you a lot. They give you more than other classes. At least in the state of Montana. It's a good deal. But almost every other school in the country, yes. Some of the bigger ones you have to get a better grade, but worry about that later. Please look at that. I would highly recommend, if you have any questions to ask me, I know it's really early. They used to do it in March. You'd have to pay. You'd have a pretty good idea where you're at. They want the money early. They started it last year. And it's the College Board. People do the SAT. They just have made up that mind. All right, so let's go ahead then and finish up. Please read through the thesis statement. Let's finish up Jefferson. And we were right here, right? We did Lewis and Clark. Talked about John Ledyard. I was at the Mandan Village, I met bears. They thought they would be back in Washington, D.C. in the spring or fall, or spring or summer of 1805. Instead, they barely made it here. In November, God, it must be just miserable when they arrived on the Columbia. No sailing vessels showed up that spring, so they decided we got to walk back. But it was a little bit easier. Yes, they had to go up river this way, but they knew the way now. And then this is all downriver. Clark and a small band went down the Yellowstone to explore that. Lewis stayed on the Missouri. And so when they arrived at the end of the summer of 1806, it was literally like they came off the face of the earth, or face of the moon. Just boom, there they were. And because they had disappeared since 1804, when they sent the prairie dog back and a few other things. So when they arrived here, this basically would give the United States a very solid claim to here. And as they were going here, they were passing fur traders going this way. So the United States was already in the process of conquering here. In 1806, before they arrived back in St. Louis, another military operation under Zebulon Pike, great name, Zebulon, he went and explored this area to give the U.S. a claim. Yes, they named Pike's Peak after him. They went into New Spain, were captured by the Spanish. They were going to be taken to Mexico City for trial. They escaped, walked almost 700 miles across the desert, and made it back into Louisiana. This incredible story about Pike, and no one ever talks about that except the little bit I told you here, because Lewis and Clark got all the credit. And there were a couple other major expeditions. The most famous was John Fremont. We'll get to him, but that's Lewis and Clark. And this would give even there was an election while this was going on, but this would give Jefferson a lot of fame. He really basked in the glory of this through his re-election in 1804. But before we get to that, we got to talk about Aaron Burr. There was a conspiracy. Make sure this is still working. I'm kind of paranoid as it goes off. Everybody seems to be on. It's called the Northern Conspiracy, and it was a Federalist plot to break away like New England. And this area right here, using much of the same justification that Madison and Jefferson used in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Now, it fell apart, but Aaron Burr, who was the vice president of the United States and just about ready to run for governor of New York, appeared to be involved with it. And he would also be involved in another plan a little bit later on. And thus the vice president from New York appeared to be committing treason. And his political enemy, his mortal enemy, Alexander Hamilton, I love this picture of Hamilton, unfinished painting. Hamilton and Burr went on this letter-writing campaign in newspapers around New York City. It wasn't so much they were writing letters, it was surrogates, friends of theirs, writing letters in the paper, attacking each other. And in one of these letters, a friend of Hamilton called Burr somebody who is not capable of being honest and have a position of authority in this country. So he called him a liar. And to Burr, whose political fortune seemed to be collapsing, he did not win governor of New York and blamed Hamilton. He thought he had a chance to be president, blamed Hamilton. His political star was fading fast. So was Hamilton. Nobody liked Hamilton, except for a small little circle of people. So you have both of these men, thinking they still should have some role in the government and were some historic role in society, and were falling off. So Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. And there were duels all the time. Political disagreements were relatively new at this time. How do you deal with somebody who disagrees with you and calls you dishonest, or at least attacks your public persona? Well, you fight a duel. And there are all kinds of rules for duels. Duels were fought all the time. Now, when I say fight a duel, most of the time a duel would end with Burr challenging Hamilton to a duel. Hamilton saying yes. So both of them trying to preserve their honor, to save face. They accept the duel, it's over. They're civilized. They're not going to kill each other, but they both agreed that they would fight to protect their honor. And why do we actually need to kill anybody? We've saved face. Nobody ran away. That was usually enough to end the duel. Most people are not psychotic. But sometimes emotions run even higher, and both of them decided we have to do something. We can't just have that. So Hamilton accepted the duel, would not retract his friend's statement. I know that sounds weird, but would not retract it. And therefore, since Hamilton was the person who was challenged, he got to accept the weapons. You know, they could fight with any number of weapons. Daggers, swords, spoons, hand-to-hand. Yeah, I like to see fight with spoons. But Hamilton had dueling pistols. These are the pistols. They're in a bank in Boston now. I know that sounds weird, but that's where they're at. And these are specially made pistols. A rifle barrel. They were accurate to about 30 yards. They had a hair trigger. So all you had to do is just touch the trigger, and the hammer would come down. Specially made, very expensive pistols. And Hamilton got to pick the weapons. They both agreed. Hair trigger, so just the lightest touch, and the pistol would go off. 30 yards, that's more than enough. And a lot of times then there'd be a duel. Both people then would show up at the spot where the duel is, and they would do the I'm not afraid, and then they walk away. No reason to kill each other. The whole thing about duels, the idea was to a combination of trying to preserve honor, but if something does happen, they all want plausible deniability. Because if two people come to a location with weapons, and they plan on shooting somebody else, that's premeditated murder. And what's the punishment for premeditated murder? That's capital. That's a capital offense. Hanging. They don't want to be hanged. So when they arrived on a little island on Hudson River, Weehawken Island, Burr and Hamilton, Burr, the vice president, Hamilton, the most famous Secretary of Treasury in the history, they met. They were rowed out to this island that was halfway between New Jersey and New York. So nobody knew for sure if they would be under New Jersey or New York law. A lot of duels were fought here. The men who rowed were told, you know nothing, right? And they're like, yes, we know nothing. Everybody knew it was a duel. But they all did this plausible deniability. When they got there, this picture, it's kind of a humorous picture, but there would be, this was actually a little bit better here. First off, I like this picture of showing Burr. Do you like how I was holding the pistol? I'm still trying to figure out how that works. But each of them had a second. And so let's say this is Burr right here. Burr's second would be standing off to the side looking at Hamilton, and then vice versa. And so let's say something happened to Hamilton. Burr's second could say, I don't know what Burr was doing. I just saw Hamilton with a gun. So they have plausible deniability. I don't know what happened. In a trial, if you want to acquit somebody, you don't need to prove they're innocent. You just have to give the jury the jury an excuse to acquit them. They don't have to be innocent. Give them a reason to acquit. Boy, did I just tell you how to be a... Oh, and then in the middle would be a judge. And they're going to be looking forward. I don't know what happened. I'm just here, and they shot each other. And in this one, they probably dropped a handkerchief. Have you ever seen those, like in a movie, where they go back to back and take the steps? They didn't do that. The judge walked, this is what they did. They walked up 20 paces, and they stood there, looking at each other. And by the way, it's looking, they don't like to shoot me. They're trying to get as little surface area as possible. So they didn't run away. They didn't walk away. They kept going. And I imagine both of them were probably thinking in a way, who's going to back out first? I'm going to be the one to back out. Another common thing would be, when they did actually decide to shoot, drop a handkerchief lands, then they can shoot. Would be to shoot in the air or shoot in the ground. Why kill somebody? We all did it. We didn't run away. We both shoot in the ground. Okay, honor is preserved. Handkerchief hit. Hamilton, right here, fired. We don't know if he was shooting in the air or he pressed a little bit on the hair trigger. A branch was actually hit above Burr's head and fell right next to Burr. Burr claimed he could hear and feel the musket ball go by his ear. And what did he do? Took very careful aim and very careful aim and hit Hamilton right here. Broke basically mangled 4 ribs into his lung, collapsed the lung. Has anyone ever broken a rib? Yeah. Don't do it. But I'll tell you what, that first breath, wonderful. I guess a collapsed lung, I've heard it described the pain as exquisite. I don't want to feel that. I've broken a rib and it hurt. Collapsed lung, I can't even imagine. He would live for a day in agony. So Burr, the vice president, murdered Alexander Hamilton. He ran away. They never really had a trial. He would have been probably acquitted anyways. This kind of ended dueling in the North. South, they kept dueling in the West. Now, the West, I mean Tennessee. I guess Nashville, there are duels all the time. By the way, then a version of the duel would be the quick draw for the at high noon and all the Western movies, which that never really happened either, but it looks good for movies. And we'll have one more duel I'll tell you about, because a certain guy named Andrew Jackson would fight over 100 duels. Don't mess with Andrew Jackson. Of course, he would be 250 years old, so it'd be really terrifying to mess with if he came back. So with that, Burr then would be involved in another conspiracy. And all you need to know about this is he wanted to break away Louisiana and give it to Mexico. Well, Spain and then Mexico. New Spain. Don't worry about the filibusters, I'll talk about them later. But he was involved in another potential treason. Part of the reason why Burr's reputation then after this would be, yeah.
So he wanted to break Louisiana and give it to Mexico?
Yeah, give it to New Spain, and then it would have been part of Mexico. That's what I was thinking in my head. Because they were just about ready to revolt against Spain and form Mexico. So don't worry about filibusters. That's another story. I'll save that one. So with that, do you want to see the creepy clown? Creepy clown? This was a commercial for little kids. I want you to ponder this for a second.
Breakfast! I'm hungry!
Oh, what?
Take it from Karinkles. That's me. The best breakfast under the big top is post sugar rice Karinkles. So crinkly, so delicious, so different. Each grain of rice.
Is that the creepiest clown you've ever seen? I want that to haunt your dreams. Okay,
Sugar rice.
so one more thing. A lot of people believe Jefferson, a lot of people in the Republican Party thought he was becoming too federalist. And these groups called themselves the Quids. They would be led by John Randolph, his father was one of the most famous of the founding fathers of Virginia. Another Virginian saying Jefferson's like a federalist. In fact, it would show one of the problems that I talked about before. Jefferson said, I want a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And then he became president. And you see this a lot. But another reason I want to show you that's supposed to be John Randolph in his mid-30s. Remember what I told you about portrait painting? What does he look like? I would say 13. I love the paintings back then. And he had very big eyes. Okay, so, but still, Jefferson would win a huge re-election victory. The 12th Amendment, though, was ratified 3 years earlier. And the Electoral College went to one vote for president, one vote for vice president. And that is why the Electoral College is still here today. There was talk about removing it, but remember what I told you back then. They did not want a democracy. They didn't want a popular vote. They were scared to put it in the House of Representatives, and so that was the compromise. And that's why the Electoral College is still here today. Because most of the time, up until relatively recently, the presidential candidate who more people wanted would be elected. And an overwhelming victory. The Federalist Party's in real trouble. Real trouble. And then, while this is going on, the Marshall Court would rule on another important court case, Fletcher versus Peck. And what it said is there could be judicial review for state laws. Now, it would still be over 60 years before they actually would look at state laws. But judicial review for state law gives the National Supreme Court a huge amount of power. Once again, they gave themselves this power. They gave themselves. And yeah, it was all, don't worry about the Yazoo land fraud. I don't want to explain that right now. But it also implied one other part that would be ruled under Dartmouth versus Woodward a few years after this. Dartmouth versus Woodward confirmed something from Fletcher versus Peck, that contracts are sacred. The sanctity of contracts. If a contract is written, a legal contract between two entities, the federal government will protect that contract. This is crucial for the growth of the market economy and the new thing called capitalism that's coming. In fact, it's starting literally at that moment. It's literally just starting in the next few years after this. And this would also be crucial because contracts are a legal document. A contract is a legal document between two entities. Two things. And contracts always favor one of them. Always. And if the federal government will protect contract, that means the federal government will protect one of these two entities. Contracts always favor whom? Yeah. And who's the writer? Say it again. Power. Whoever, it's not necessarily, it's whoever has the power. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, might not even realize it. If you have a phone and you have a Gmail account or an email account, have you signed that little contract? Do you agree? You check that little box saying that? You know what I'm talking about? Does anyone even read it? Even know what you signed? That's a contract. Yeah. And you signed it, but you wanted the product they have, so they have the power. That's the point. So it could be wealth, it might not be wealth, but it's power. If you want to go buy a car and you go take a loan out and you go to the bank, they have the power, don't they? Because they have the money and you need it. So it's power. Now, wealth sometimes can be power, but it's power. Two really important court cases, Fletcher versus Peck, Dartmouth versus Woodward. And so in 1808, also, the United States would ban the international slave trade. So the U.S. would no longer take people kidnapped in other places, obviously in this context we mean Africa, and brought to the United States. Now they still take slaves, and so you might get some horrific dirty tricks played here, but the thought was that slavery would die away. Remember the Constitution. It said 20 years. In 20 years, Congress can do something about this international slave trade. For 20 years, they wouldn't touch it. That's that Commerce Clause. But the Congress can regulate interstate commerce. This ship right here, this is what they'll call it ultra-type packer. And I'll tell you more about that a little bit later on. They really thought you limit the number of slaves, slavery will go away. Yeah, right. Well, while this is going on, in Jefferson's second term, kind of right in the euphoria of Lewis and Clark, the whole thing would fall apart. That war in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars, was raging on. And it was, to the American point of view, a commercial war. The war between Britain and France was a stalemate. Britain with its powerful fleet This is them destroying the combined French-Spanish fleet off the coast of Spain, Battle of Trafalgar. But Britain controlled the seas. And remember, Britain's an island. So they couldn't be invaded. Yet Napoleon and this incredible army had dominated much of Europe. This is at Austerlitz, where they defeated an Austrian-Russian army in 1806 or 1805, their greatest victory. Napoleon and the French army looked unbeatable, but the Royal Navy controlled the seas. And in this stalemate, both tried to destroy their opposing countries' economies. Napoleon would issue what's called the Berlin and Milan decrees. This gives you an idea of the extent of their empire. By the way, they created what's called the Continental System. And the Continental System said this: every area that Napoleon had brought to their knees and forced to sign a treaty, which this is this red line here, so almost everywhere, including Russia, not Portugal, that'd be another story, they couldn't trade with Britain. Or any country that traded with Britain. That meant any U.S. merchant ship that traded with Britain could not trade on the continent of Europe. They were going to destroy what Napoleon called that country of shopkeepers. That was his plan. It failed. It did not work. But it did have effect on American merchant ships. By the way, Berlin was the capital of a country called Prussia, which is now the capital of Germany. Milan is a major city in Italy, but then it was actually part of France. That gives you an idea of the extent of Napoleon's empire. Yeah?
So did you say it was the continental system that made trade with Britain?
Yeah. And it was created at these two decrees that Napoleon would issue. By the way, want to hear another funny thing about this? I didn't even realize until first period, just because I just wasn't thinking. I have a nephew in Berlin, and I have a nephew in Milan. Want to hear the other part? Berlin, his name is Alec. In Milan, Alex. I'm not making that up. That's all I got. Okay.
Cool.
It's my brother's son here, and my sister-in-law is here. Small world, huh? Berlin's cool. Okay. The Orders in Council was the British response. And all this means basically is a law from Parliament. It's just a term. But this would blockade areas controlled by France. And so here is a British frigate on lonely blockade duty off the coast of France. And it's supposed to be just a generic painting. But these ships would stop any merchant ship going to a French or French-controlled harbor and look for contraband. Anything that could help France. Meaning what? Anything, yeah. They just stopped all trade. But that wasn't the only thing. They were also looking for deserters. Life on a Royal Navy ship was hell on earth. And these ships might be sailing for 2 years and never touch land. The only time they ever go to a harbor and get fresh water and some resupplies. And then back out to sea. And so anytime they go to a harbor, men would just be jumping off and deserting. Because life, a 20-year hitch in the Royal Navy, you're probably not going to make it. Terrible food, weevily hardtack. Hardtack are really hard crackers. You know what I mean when I say weevily? Protein, aka bugs, all over it. Scurvy because of lack of vitamin C. Nightmare. And the discipline on these ships was harsh. For the most minor offense, because a lot of the men didn't want to be there, they bring out the cat o' nine tails. And that's why there's so many deserters. I thought it'd be a good time to show you a cat o' nine tails. Cat o' nine tails with 9 whips. For the most minor offense, they'd be whipped. Sometimes they'd be thrown the yard arm and whipped. But that is why they're looking for deserters all the time. And so when they would stop American-owned merchant vessels, they would look for deserters, and this was called impressment. And they would line the crewmen on the American ship and say, we know there are deserters from the Royal Navy who took jobs on this American ship. And they would go point them out and rough them up and drag them away, and they're back in the Navy, or in the Navy for the first time. Because what does a deserter look like? So they would just find the healthiest guys and say they're deserters, and take them away at gunpoint and force them into the Royal Navy.
So if you looked unhealthy, that was a good thing.
What's that?
So if you like started coughing and wheezing before you got on the ship.
Yeah, act like you're really sick. And who'd want to be a sailor on a merchant ship? You see how this is really hurting American shipping? By the way, you know we're coming to a war, right? Another war! So tomorrow, real fast, talk a little bit about essays. I'll talk about thesis statements. On Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday we'll do practice ones. Write an essay. It'll be so much fun. Watch it. Let me move high. The blue snowball. How do we do on the quiz, by the way? Did everyone do okay? Did you not have notes, or?
I did, but I forgot to do the last meeting.
How do we do on the quiz?
We did pretty good. Well, I did.
All right.
I mean, I just didn't write down the name of that person. I just thought it was a fun story, so.
I think I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. I don't think I got your notes from last year. I think you sent me the diagnosis number 10. Did I? Yeah. Not a big deal. Give it to me and let me see it and I'll give you the points. Sound good?
Yeah.
I think I just left it blank, but